To the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And this is episode 183 of the podcast. And welcome all. We're going to be talking about Amazon. So much Amazon based on all the news that was out last week. Microsoft Ignite is happening. So we're going to be talking about some updates with Microsoft, including Cortana and Azure. Plus, we've got a new Withings watch. We're going to see if Kevin wants it. Plus, new locks, a new sprinkler, and maybe a quick update on my brilliant lights. Plus, this week we've got a guest, Rayford Smith of Entergy, who I talked to at the SaaS Analytics Summit. We're going to talk all about how to manage a digital transformation. And speaking of SaaS, they are a sponsor of this week's podcast, although I did pay my own way for the summit. So, all of that and more awaits you. But first, let's get a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Auklet. Keep your IoT fleet growing and trade in the days of remoting into your customers' devices to identify and resolve bugs. Upgrade to Auklet in minutes and let its edge-first problem-solving software do the heavy lifting for you. Auklet automatically finds performance issues and then tracks them from release to release, collecting all the intel you need to rapidly identify root causes for the errors plaguing you and your customers. Register for free today at auklet.io. That's AUKLET.io. Okay, Kevin, last week I was at the Amazon announcements, which were actually 70 pieces of news released in about an hour and a half. It was like getting shot in the head with about 100 water balloons. It was very exciting.
And we're going to cover all 70 in depth today.
Nope, we are not.
What is with Amazon and their timing? They know we do this podcast on a certain day of the week, and yet they had their event right after we did our podcast.
I know. I can't believe they're not appreciating us and our 25,000 subscribers, listeners that download each episode.
It's on our calendars, Amazon. You can see it.
Poo on them. Okay, so we've already written a couple things about it, and by we, I mean me. So if you want to discover the 11 new Echo devices, from clocks to microwaves to new spots to all kinds of crazy stuff, that's on the website. I also talked about the strategy. There's a couple things we didn't cover in that news, and we can talk about, and there's actually a couple questions that you guys sent to us. The first one, and we'll cover this at the very end, so stay tuned for that, but that is, based on all of this news, would we go to being a straight Google or straight Amazon home? Does this mean that what should somebody who's new to this pick? So keep that in mind as we talk about some of the features. So in addition to all of these devices, Amazon did a really cool thing. It has basically now turned all of your Echoes and Echo Dots into security alarms. So they've launched a service called Guard, and this is something you can say as you're walking out of the house, enable Guard, and it will, all of your Echoes turn into glass break sensors. So they're listening for the sound of glass breaking or the sound of smoke detectors or carbon monoxide alarms going off. And if they hear these, they'll actually send you a notification. If it's monitored security, you can actually send it to your monitored security system and they'll do whatever they do. I thought this was really cool.
Well, it's not just cool, it's brilliant because it doesn't require people to buy any new hardware. Basically, the microphones are already very good in the Echo products, and they're just repurposing them for a very useful service.
Yeah, and it's free. So, the downside to this, though, people, is that now, in addition to your wake word that you have selected, Amazon is going to always be listening for glass breaking and the sound of your smoke alarm going off. So, in some ways, they're using security as a way to encroach further on privacy, if we want to look at it that way, which some people will.
I don't necessarily think so. They're always listening anyway.
Well, yes, but now you've got a greater number of triggers that will trigger something happening and take an action and store that snippet to the cloud.
Yeah, that's fine. They want to listen to the sound of breaking glass all day. That's fine with me.
I mean, it is a valuable service. You are trading your privacy for something that I think most people would be like, yeah, that's cool.
Very true. Very true.
And if you're discussing a murder, maybe don't break glass. It just encourages.
Yeah. Let me add that to my rules of when I'm discussing these things. Yes. Okay.
Right.
Don't talk near broken glass. Okay.
Got it. Or if you are in the midst of murdering someone, try not to break glass.
Could you step away from the window for a sec? Thank you. Okay. Boom.
So the other thing to think about here is they're adding a lot of intelligence at the edge. So now I talked to their AI guy about how they're building their models, because when you're always listening, this is happening. This doesn't get sent to the cloud, right? So now they've got 3 compressed models sitting at the edge, one for the wake word, one for glass, one for smoke detection, which, if you're in the AI world or the edge processing kind of world, that's kind of an interesting little feature. And also speaking of the edge, Amazon announced local support for commands at this event.
And that is big.
That is huge. Big. Don't know when it is coming. They said in a couple weeks. Who knows? But this is big. This means if your internet goes out, you can actually still say things like turn on the lights, and the lights will actually go out. Yay!
Yay! This was a huge reason I had actually gone with Wink in the past. They were, I don't want to say the first, but they were among the first to have localized commands in a hub. So that was key for me. Not that we lose internet a lot, but I've got the family trained not to touch any light switches at this point, so I think they would trip over themselves if they had to use them.
I'm pretty sure they could master it. Your family is very smart.
In the dark, I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really noteworthy and worth pulling out for you guys. And then...
Actually, I got 2 questions, though. One about the guard service. Not a question, actually a comment. Did I understand correctly? They're also going to automate your smart lights when you're not at home?
Yes, they are. So you can actually set that up. So when you turn on guard, it will automate your smart lights, which, by the way, is a feature that I had with Philips Hue and Nest integration all the way back in 2015. But it didn't work super well. And I think Wink also offers this feature as part of their hubs. You can have an automation or a robot that controls your lights when you're not home. But this is still super awesome because a lot of people don't have all of those other devices.
Exactly. And the other thing, you were talking about the machine learning models now. They've got a couple of them now in these devices. I'm wondering, and this is just a general question, as we see more AI machine learning pushed to edge devices in the homes, will the current hardware be able to keep up? I mean, I'm thinking about it from a memory standpoint, from a CPU standpoint, and so on. Or as our devices get more complex through these algorithmic learning models, will we actually need to upgrade in a couple of years?
I think we probably will. So if I took one thing away from this event, it's that, your 4-year-old Echoes, they actually are getting a lot of these features. The big difference right now is that the speakers sound better in the new gear. But I'm wondering if maybe we'll get this product iteration and then we'll get the next one is when you swap. So maybe we're looking at a smart speaker lifespan of maybe 8 years with enough overhead and memory for these things. I don't know.
Considering the prices, that's not crazy, I would agree. And also, you won't have to upgrade. You just may have to forego some of the newest features.
Right. And what was really interesting is how they talked about what they did on the AI backend to shrink these models. It's not worth diving into here, but they have given a lot of thought of trying to make sure everything can run as close to the edge as possible, so you get lots more stuff. The other thing they have, and we didn't talk about this, is whisper mode. So
I love it.
I know. If you whisper to your Echo in the coming weeks, it will whisper back and it will play back things more softly because you're whispering.
I love this because I know I've said this on multiple shows. I stay up late, everybody's asleep, and when I leave my room, my office, I will tell one of my assistants to shut the light, and whoever assistant it is, whichever, it's loud. It's really loud.
Super. Now, Google has actually something similar with the Google Home. You can turn on in the Google Home app, under devices, you can do a setting called night mode. And then you choose it from one time to another time. And when you have that, mute notifications and any boot up sounds, which I don't know if the power's ever gone out in the middle of the night with your Amazon Echoes and she comes on, she's like, hello.
Yes.
Searching for Wi-Fi. And everyone's like, what just happened?
There's a burglar in the house searching for Wi-Fi.
Exactly. So it dims your LED lights and it lowers the maximum volume that it can have. So those are all really nice things. This is a little more intuitive because it just automatically does it when you whisper as opposed to having to set a setting. But just so you know, if you're in the Googleverse, this is still something that you can do.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was overall the Amazon stuff was so exciting because they came out with not just a bunch of devices, but actually an entire way of thinking about the smart home ecosystem that gets us way closer to this contextual, easy world that Kevin and I think we should already be in. So they announced some things to make it easier to set up Wi-Fi. They talked about creating a module called mute your echoes for this, the Alexa Connect Kit, which is a development board. Well, it's actually a module that's stuck on a development board. You don't need to do that for your product, but it's a Bluetooth and Wi-Fi module that connects to Amazon's cloud service. What's interesting there is that you can actually buy that and your cloud costs will be covered with that initial fee for that module. That doesn't mean all your cloud costs are going to be covered. Like if you're going to send up video, that's probably not going to be covered. But for a lot of like sensors or one-off devices, this is a great thing because you no longer have to worry about like having these crazy costs every single year with the device. It solves a lot of the business problems, model problems.
And what that's going to likely bring is even more, if you can imagine it, more Madam A devices.
Yes. So this is great for the Amazon ecosystem. We're going to see more devices. We're going to see cheaper devices. We're going to see sensors, maybe, especially since now there's support for sensors. So they're really pushing forward with a vision for the smart home. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, that really rivals what Apple did with the smartphone. I just came out of this feeling like, God, Apple, what are you doing, man? This is the sort of thing that you guys used to be so good at. And Amazon's really doing so much here.
It gets back to something you said a show or two ago, that pretty much they're setting the standard. And I don't just mean the standard for the products, but standards for how these products work.
Yes. And it's going to be awesome. So knowing all of this, more devices, cheaper devices, whimsical devices like a $60 microwave or a $30, Madam A powered clock, would I invest still in the Google ecosystem? So that was the question that someone had asked. And it's a good question. I am all in on the Google ecosystem for my web services, so email and all that, even though sometimes it's a pain to get my Google Apps account to do anything with me. I think I'm going to connect all of my devices to Madam A for the time being. I'd focus there for the smart home stuff, but I'd probably keep I have the Lenovo Smart Display finally. I would keep one of those in my house as a way to interact with my professional and computer-based life, if that makes sense, and just have Amazon be my smart home-based life.
That makes sense. I've even got Siri in my life. I have all three, and it's confusing as all get out to be talking to three different things in the same room, for one thing, but this is what we do, and there's a reason we do it. So I don't think I would commit to any one of them just because of what I do here with you and so on. But if I had to, I probably would be leaning to go back to Madam A because the integrations are into so many more types of products,
Yes. Oh, speaking of integrations, this is a big one. The Smart Home Skills API. They updated that, and they updated in a very important way. They updated in a way that makes me feel like they are coming after device and data schemas that we talk about a lot on the show. And that's basically a universal way for a device to say, hey, this is what I am and this is what I'm able to do. So right now we don't have that. We have company or groups like the OCF trying to create standards around this. And what we have with Amazon is this Smart Home Skills API that allows for 3 different settings. So it has a toggle setting, and that turns things on or off. It can be used in everything. It has a range option that lets you set a range. That could be a temperature. It could be an oven, thermostat temperature. It could be sound, anything that has a range. And it has a mode option that lets a device maker program a specific function. So this is where you're going to get, like in an oven, is it bake or is it broil? In a washing machine, is it permanent press or cotton towels? So those kind of specifics. And that actually covers quite a wide range of things that devices can do. And it's going to be really powerful for developers to have this because then you can basically create a skill so easily. And then they also talked about natural invocation. And this is very powerful as well. This is where you're going to be able to ask Madam A just to do something like turn on the vacuum. And it's going to understand what the vacuum is based on patterns of usage that it's seen from this device in your home. So this is some of this where it's always going to be learning based on your information that's happening in your specific home and it's going to be tied back to that home.
It's smart context. It's awesome once we get there.
Yeah. So, very exciting stuff. And now, we've talked a lot about it. We probably could have done a whole show on this, but we're going to zip through to another Seattle-based company, Microsoft, because they are doing their big event this week, Microsoft Ignite, and they have shown off actually things for Cortana that make it seem like, oh, it's just like Amazon's doing in the smart home. Cortana just wants to do this in the office. And then a lot of industrial support for things like digital twins and stuff in Azure. So let's talk about how Microsoft is making Cortana even cooler. I don't know. Was Cortana cool? Probably not.
From a Halo perspective, which is where they got the name, Cortana's cool. But other than that, I'm not really jazzed. But then again, I don't work in an enterprise anymore. If I still did, sure, I'd be super psyched over this. Show me our sales figures for last month, or even, what's the trend of help desk calls over the last 6 months and why, or whatever. What's the big main root cause? It's just another user interface to get at analytics.
Yes, and it's called Cortana Skills for Enterprise. And this is the first major update to improve the way Cortana works with developers. So that's really exciting. And we'll see how this works out. As a proof of concept, Microsoft did an IT help desk skill for Cortana to help people file tickets, which, back in the day when I was at a large company, that was a pain in the butt. So yay. And then also this will tie into things like Microsoft, what they showed off at Build earlier this year, where they had like this super intelligent Cortana powered conference room that like mapped physical spaces and recognized people and took notes for you. It was ridiculous. And Microsoft at Ignite did talk about broadening its AI efforts. They also, on the industrial IoT side, talked about some new Azure services. So they are updating their Azure Databox set of products that's going to enable customers to run Kubernetes, which is an orchestration layer that helps orchestrate services that run at the edge and the cloud. So they're going to kind of bring Kubernetes down. They actually talked about this at Build as well. They're going to update Windows Server, and it's going to support some Azure services. This is a big deal because there are some devices out there running Windows Server that need to be able to talk to Azure if you're going to do kind of this edge computing model with gateways and sensors and a cloud that all needs to talk to each other. And Microsoft is adding digital twins.
Woohoo!
So, yay! Azure Digital Twins is one of the brand new cloud services that Microsoft is going to offer on Azure. And this is a big deal because the industrial world loves some digital twins. PTC has been one of the big companies pushing this concept, but basically it's a virtual version of any machine that you've got out there. And you can take your sensor data, sensor data from the physical device, you run it against your virtual version of that device, and you can use it for predictive maintenance to understand things that are going wrong. It's both a big validation of PTC, which has been touting this for years, and also a necessary component for a lot of Microsoft Azure's industrial clients.
And you could even use this as make a digital copy of your workspace. Maybe you've got a large office or data center or whatever it might be. Create a digital version of it, duplicate it essentially. And again, tie in sensor data. You could adjust things. Maybe you want to adjust temperatures and see if that affects traffic patterns or, machinery, whatever it might be. There's tons of opportunities here. This is really cool stuff.
It is. And I actually like the fact that Microsoft it's aiming this more at the use cases it's showing off are designed more for enterprise office space, which I thought was interesting because PTC is all about I will model your steam trap or your flow meter or all these crazy devices that are very industrial. Whereas Microsoft's hey, let's create a virtual version of your office and see what you can do with that.
And I see why they did that, to be honest. And at first hand, I cannot tell you how much time I would waste. This was at Google in New York City, which was a big building. It's a whole city block and 15 stories. Going to, say, a conference room that wasn't supposed to be occupied but still was, or decided to go to the 11th floor cafeteria for burritos when the line on the 4th floor was nothing. There was nobody there, So I go up to the 11th and I'm not going to have time for a burrito. Then I have to go back downstairs. It's such a time waste for your resources on so many environmental things.
Agreed. So this is really exciting, and we are going to find out more. Maybe we'll get someone from Microsoft to come on the show to talk about what this makes possible because, again, wicked cool. Okay, it's like I'm from Boston all of a sudden. All right, let's talk about some quick news bits on the consumer front. Kevin, Withings.
Withings, which Nokia bought, and then Withings kind of bought itself back, and it's standalone again. They came out with their newest hybrid smartwatch. I call it a hybrid because it looks like a traditional watch, very mechanical looking regular watch, but it has a small OLED display in it for your heart rate because there's a heart rate sensor in there. You can check your sleep patterns in there through a connected app. It will track your workouts. So it's got sensors for all that. GPS, you'd have to have, it's connected GPS. You'd have to have a phone with you if you're going to go running with this thing, but some people still do that. That's fine. $200. Killer battery life because it's a very small OLED display, like a circular display that just has a limited amount of space, and there's no backlight on OLED because the screens don't need that. So that saves battery life. So 25-day battery life, which is amazing. $200. It's not for me because I want a GPS and a heart rate and everything standalone, which is why I wear an Apple Watch. And there's others out there that do the same thing. So it's not a full-fledged smartwatch. You're not going to take calls on it. But for a large number of people, this is a perfect hybrid device. It gives you what you want without too many constraints, such as, charging every day and so on, or looking like a smartwatch. So I like it. Again, not for me, but I like what Withings is doing.
Okay. And I like that you're like, it's not full featured. I mean, you can't make phone calls on this. I'm like, this is not a feature that I have demanded of my watches in the past.
I was messing with my walkie-talkie feature yesterday on the Apple Watch with my daughter. So I'm into that stuff.
No, I appreciate it. And, the Apple Watch, if I wanted the stuff they showed off at the Apple event a couple weeks back with fall detection and things like that, that's actually something that I've been trying to program into my life forever using, kind of amalgamated sensors and IFT recipes, and it pulled it all into one, and I was very excited, but not excited enough to go buy an iPhone and the watch. I was like, too much. So
I understand.
Please, rest of the world, get on that. Okay, let's talk about new locks. Okay, last year, August was purchased by Assa Abloy, who is the maker of Yale locks. And now Yale locks can be upgraded to work with your August app. So the August lock is not a deadbolt replacement lock. It is, you place it over. And this has been, this is great for some people. They like it. It's less complicated to install. But if you're one of those people who feel like way more secure with an actual deadbolt replacement, but you like the August app because it works with more things and is kind of interesting, then you can actually do that now. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. This feels kind of niche, but there's like a HomeKit module. You could update your Yale lock with a HomeKit module that you plug into the lift that battery case cover thing.
Off the back of the lock, right?
And then you plug that module in and it's going to work with the August app and HomeKit. So that's kind of nice for a certain segment of the population.
No doubt about it. I mean, you get the August features like Door Sense, so you'll know if the door is locked or unlocked or if it's open or closed. And, this is why they bought, August. It makes sense. This also does require a very small Wi-Fi bridge just to get this information from the lock to your network. But it's not a big box of a bridge. It's more of it sits on your outlet somewhere nearby.
It's a little plug-in module.
Yeah.
So that exists now for those of you guys who are interested in that. Speaking of HomeKit, there is a new Ratio sprinkler. It is getting HomeKit support. So yay, Ratio. This is the Ratio 3. If you have the 1 or 2, you're not going to get it. So
you can tell Stacey doesn't use an iPhone. Yay, Ratio. Listen, there's a segment of the population that says, I'm going HomeKit for good reason, and that's fine. So, yeah, I mean, this is good news.
If you're in that population, here's a Ratio, which is, I had their Gen 2, I tested their Gen 2 sprinkler and bought it actually for my father-in-law, and it's great. He loves it. It helps him quite a bit. So now you can ask Siri, hey, turn on my sprinklers, or stop watering the vegetable garden.
And this is $230. The Ratio 3 is the more expensive, newer model.
Woo! Okay. This is just an update because I had written about this and talked about it and even complained about it on Twitter. So I have these brilliant light switches. I just had someone come out and replace them for me because I had a pre-production unit that they felt was not behaving as well. So we're going back to the drawing board on the Brilliant review. Many of the things about the UI I stand by, and they happen regardless of the hardware. It's just the way they're cramming a lot into this thing. So I'm going to try that out again, and hopefully it will be a better experience. So stay tuned for that, probably in another week. And now, let us go to a question from our audience. This is a question on the IoT Podcast Hotline, which is brought to you by Schlage. Do not miss, you guys, your chance to win a Schlage Sense Smart Deadbolt and Wi-Fi adapter. You can enter to win by calling us at 512-623-7424 and leaving us a question. You must do this before September 30th at midnight Eastern to be entered to win this particular lock. And remember, smarter homes start with Schlage. So, this week's voicemail is from Brent. Let's listen to it.
Hello, this is Brent Mayer. I'm calling from Utah. I have a problem with my freezer. I have a stand-up vertical freezer that my kids will sometimes leave open. So across the last 10 years, I've lost the contents of it 3 times. And we've tried locks, but sometimes they get in the way. I'd really love something that would alert me when the freezer is left open, or even perhaps if the temperature changes within the freezer. Thanks.
Okay, Brent. This is one of those, gosh, this is so easy. I can't believe we have to answer a question about this. And then we started thinking about it and we're like, oh my gosh, this is such a pain in everyone's butt. So, Kevin, you get started with your solution first.
All right. Well, probably the least expensive solution that I can think of is to buy a door/window sensor, Brent, because they're battery powered, they're inexpensive. One part goes on the frame of the freezer and one goes on the door. And basically, when the door is open, the sensor says, hey, I'm open, and you can be notified that the door is open. However, you don't want to know exactly when the door is open. You want to know when it's left open. So in order to do that, it gets a little more expensive, perhaps. What we don't know, Brent, is if you have a smart home hub. Because if you have a hub, you can easily set a little alert that says, hey, if the sensor's been apart or the door's been open for more than, say, 2 or 3 minutes, send me a notification. So we don't know if you have a hub. If you do, it's pretty easy. If you don't, I don't know that this is going to work because you're only going to be notified that the door is open or closed. You're not going to know if it's left open unless you physically go back and check after you were notified it was opened.
Yes. Okay, so that was one option. And I have some other options. None of them are perfect, but we found lots of Bluetooth data logging sensors that measure temperature, and a lot of them have wire-based temperature probes. So what you would do is you take the temperature probe, you plug it into the sensor, you stick the temperature probe inside the freezer, and you leave the temperature thing on the outside.
Right, because a freezer is kind of like it's going to block all signals. So part of this, the part with the radio, has to be outside the freezer.
Yes, it's a giant Faraday cage.
Yes.
Although if it's left open,
you'll get a signal.
Then you know. You're like, oh, it's open because I'm getting data from my temperature sensor. But this is a $40, this is the Inkbird Smart Sensor. This is $40, and it would work for your use case with the exception of this is Bluetooth based. So you have to be within 40 feet or so. So I don't love it for this because it can send you alerts, but it's only going to send you alerts when you walk within range. Right,
you're not going to be able to remotely be away from home and know that the door's been left open, for example, either.
But I also like the fact that it lets you set pretty wide sampling intervals. So like between 10 seconds all the way up to 30 minutes. I would say for your freezer, a 10-minute interval is probably good and will save you battery life. So that's just, if you're looking for sampling rates, that's probably good for there. And so that's one option. We did find, and we don't love this for another reason, we found a Crosse mobile wireless monitoring system. This one comes with a dry probe that should work just for inside your freezer. And it has its own little gateway. This is a $30 device. The gateway gives you the Wi-Fi capabilities, and that you need to plug in. But to get data to your phone after the first 3 months is going to cost you 99 cents a month. So that's a subscription fee associated with this device that's basically $12 a year.
Which is a lot cheaper than hundreds of dollars of frozen food being defrosted.
Yes. So that is an option. I have had Crosse sensors in the past. They tended to work for me for about 2 years before dying. So keep that in mind. But again, that particular product is only $30 plus the subscription fee. And then we found the Temp Stick wireless temperature sensor for $149.
Youch.
Which is pricey as heck, but it's Wi-Fi. It connects to a gateway. You're going to have to be changing the batteries on this probably quite a bit. But this gives you everything all in one. So
right, you could be anywhere and be notified, for example, that your freezer's open. So there's no subscription fee on that one, right?
There is no subscription fee, but
But it's a big upfront cost.
Yes. More than the $30 plus $12 for like the 2 years. I think that $30 sensor is going to work.
I think it's worth pointing out also that when we went down a big rabbit hole looking for all kinds of different solutions here, and I noticed that a lot of the manufacturers of fridges and freezers are now starting to include sensors for this type of thing, such as Samsung and GE, for example. So in the future, when you do replace the freezer, because you said it was 10 years old, at some point it's going to have to get replaced. I would consider, looking at one that has a sensor built in.
Yes, that's the magic of the future. All right. So hopefully, Brent, this helps you. Otherwise, we think you should get rid of your kids. We don't really.
How did they get past the locks? No,
all right. So that is a lot we've discussed this week. We hope you guys have enjoyed this segment of the show. Please stay tuned for a conversation with Rayford Smith, who is with Entergy, a utility that serves 3 million customers, as he explains, holy cow, how they're bringing that company up to the current digital standards. It's a pretty involved process, and I think it's an interesting interview. So stay tuned for that and for a message from our sponsor. Hey everyone, we are taking a break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is SAS, and I have Jason Mann, who is the VP of IoT at SAS, here to talk to us. We've talked about SAS at the Edge, a new IoT division, and its partner ecosystem. This week, let's talk about AI and IoT. So which comes first, IoT data or AI?
That's a good question. So you're seeing a lot of ink put towards both topics. In my opinion, though, it's IoT data that comes first. Certainly AI and the capabilities and analytic evaluation that is associated with that is critical, but the fact is AI routines, algorithms are trained against data and are executed against data. So in my opinion, IoT data is required. It comes first before you can achieve value from applied artificial intelligence.
How does AI and IoT work together?
So AI is certainly a path to insight, a path of value, decisioning. IoT infrastructure, on the other hand, provides the foundational element for execution of IoT principles. So if you think about, to the first question, the data is critical, but also as you look to the distributed environment, in many cases pushing to the edge, the models may be trained in a persistent environment, AI models are trained there, but the execution, the value that's generated from the execution of either scoring or the models themselves can only be achieved when you have that infrastructure for deployment. So we talk about reduced latency can be a primary driver. Latency is reduced by pushing the decisioning closer to the source of data. So you can have the best AI model in the world, but if you don't have the ability to apply it at the right time and right place, the value is quickly reduced.
How are companies applying AI to their IoT data today?
So we're seeing examples across multiple industries, usually in cases where the requirement is to assess data volumes that are just outside human capability. One example is in high-tech manufacturing, where they're using video to detect defects at the most granular level, all the way down to pixel levels within high-definition pictures. And it provides the ability to do this at scale and generate insight into yield and improved throughput that you just couldn't do if human interaction were required.
Awesome, Jason. So where can we go to find out more about how SAS is helping customers use AI in IoT?
So we have a landing page, SAS.com/IoT. It's a great starting point for both industry use cases and horizontal messaging around IoT.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Rayford Smith, who is VP of Energy, Technology, and Analytics at Entergy, which is an electricity and gas provider for 3 million customers. So, Rayford, let's talk about your journey, because you came into this role 2.5 years ago and you described it as there was nothing.
Right. It feels like almost the beginning of the Bible, right? In the beginning, it was void and formless. And over time, we had 7 days, well, it's more like 2.5 years of trying to come up with defining analytics, coming up with the guiding principles, coming up with our roadmap, our strategy, and then ultimately now shifting into development and deployment of analytical capabilities at the company.
Okay, so these guys were in the dark ages, and you started with nothing. Now you are an organization of 22 people. You've helped the company deliver a 12x return on investment. I'm assuming buying analytics software, but maybe there's more to this. So let's start with kind of some of the concrete things that you guys have done.
Sure. So first off is just coming up with a common definition of what analytics really is. It's amazing. Certain terms get used and people can come up with any variation of what they mean. But we came up with it, which is really that analytics are meant to help us use data to predict and create some sort of valuable outcome for the company in the future. That really then led to, well, if that's what analytics is, what are the rules of the road for how we should go about doing it? And we came up with a series of guiding principles that informed our development. One being that we think analytics is synonymous with strategy. And as such, because it's this key capability, we shouldn't outsource it. Instead, we needed to develop those capabilities in-house. And because it's that important, that relevant to not only the growth and direction of our company, but our future, that analytics wasn't so much about technology. It wasn't about how many weird sounding things I could get in and get the executives to pay for, like Pig and Hadoop and Spark and whatever. It was really around change management. Like, how do you get an organization of 13,000 people who've already got 100 plus years of process and history and everything else on the way they do things to fundamentally alter that way of doing business?
So how did you pick a project? Did you pick a system? You're kind of talking philosophically, but let's
right.
talk about practicality.
So it's really important. So we set about creating an analytics roadmap, which was our strategy. It's a 3-year strategy for how to execute analytics at our company and fundamentally create that change. The roadmap in and of itself, the process to create it was the first step in creating the change. We gave it the guiding principles. We gave it an architecture, a high-level architecture of what we wanted to accomplish. But we really executed the change through a whole series of workshops that we did throughout the organization. That had multiple purposes. The first of which was to identify where the value was that we would create. And more than just financial results. As a matter of fact, if you hone in just on financial results, you tend to get what I call the Graham Raper effect, which is, I'm here, and I'm using air quotes, I'm here to help, and you cut the budget just once, and then you're never invited back, right? And so we knew we needed to get outside of just the narrow or myopic view of benefits that could be created. The workshops really helped us do that. We would speak with the executives, and then later we'd do further workshops with their teams to identify pain points, what kind of value they thought they could create beyond just the dollars and cents. That process also helped us uncover talent within our own organization. Talent that we as a company didn't think we had. They thought, well, we're just going to have to build the organization from hiring everyone from the outside. There's no one inside the company. That proved to be false.
Can you walk me through what one of those, an example of one of the workshops what the team did, what they were trying to tell you to tackle?
Sure. So first off, it's important to know who was in the workshop. So the first workshops we would typically do, they were about 2 hours long. And in the workshop, we had, of course, me or someone from the enterprise analytics area, meaning we also brought in consulting outside support. We wanted to bring in someone to facilitate that conversation that had kind of been there, done that, so that they could help guide the conversation as a neutral third party, but they could also layer in, hey, I've seen this elsewhere. Here's something else you haven't thought of or you could do. And then, of course, we also brought IT with us. Our organization is not part of the information technology organization where actually, like I said, if analytics is strategy, then strategy is not IT. But we did bring IT because they're a key player in getting access to the data, standing up the systems, keeping it patched, maintained, and operating. And then we also started at least the first conversations, those 2 hour ones, the executives of each of the major organizations. organizations. That typically the way the process flow worked was we would always start with, what is analytics, right? Just a simple question, trying to get everybody to bring out their ideas, have a conversation around it, but largely to coalesce around that forward-looking view of we want to use analytics to create some value by predictive capability of the company. That was usually the first 30 to 45 minutes. And the remainder of the conversation was on high-level pain points. Where in your organization do you really see opportunity? Do you see need? Interspersed into that, we would give them a state of what is the art of the possible that was tuned to their area. So if we were talking the supply chain, and another reason why we brought the third-party facilitator was to have that conversation and say, by the way, supply chains outside of our industry, here's how they deal with those things. Here are some interesting things you can do. We use that as kind of a way to stir the pot and help create interest in the customer. We would ask them vaguely, high-level questions about where's your data, what are your key systems, those sorts of things. That's the first conversation. We then would go to in-depth conversations, usually half day to full day, then based on the areas that they identified in that initial 2-hour meeting.
How long did this process take within different organizations?
Yeah, it's about a 3-month process for us. We spent another 2 months after that, though, harmonizing all the results we found. So at the end of the day, we created not only a series of use cases that each business unit had said, this is of interest to us, this is the value we think we can create from it, here's where the data we think that we need for that is, and here's the rough prioritization we might want to take at that. We had to synthesize and harmonize all that because obviously how one team might make an assumption of value would be different than another, and we needed time to kind of bring all that stuff together. So roughly from initiation to about the 6-month mark is how long it took us to go through the full process of workshops, interviews, executive updates, and then harmonization and ultimately creating this roadmap in terms of where we think the company ought to go.
Okay, so now you have a roadmap. Is this when you brought in vendors or did you have them in beforehand? Like, what's after the roadmap?
Yeah, well, so there's one key question you have to ask while doing the roadmap that we had to get answered, and that is, what kind of a way do you want to prosecute the use cases? In other words, do you go towards the places with the low-hanging fruit or the readily available data, or do you want to step back and take a more enterprise view? We called that the no business unit left behind strategy. But we went around and we surveyed all the senior leaders and said, look, you can go with focusing on 1 or 2 areas. But that creates the haves and the have-nots. And you may be a have, but you're likely going to be a have-not. Are you okay with that? By the way, if we do the haves and have-nots, we might go a little faster to start with. But it might create some unintended consequences, right? Because the have-nots might team up and go, well, that really didn't work for me, and so I'm going to hire my own, and I'm going to do my own thing. And you create all sorts
Silo.
of... Right. Terrible silos. We don't want to create silos from the beginning. And to a person, everyone at the leadership team at Entergy said, we want you to go with the enterprise focus, which was really great because it allowed us to take a longer view and a far more comprehensive view about how to tool it, architect it, and ultimately implement it. So when we got the business cases and all the roadmap and the strategy that we said, okay, this is what we're going to go do, it then created the next hurdle for us to do, which is, okay, now we have to go pick tools that conform with our architecture and our strategy. We need to hire because we have literally no staff. And we have to do this in a very short amount of time because the company wants to start recognizing benefits as soon as they possibly can. So we went down a dual track of both hiring and going out, and we issued a whole bunch of RFPs for particular components that we went through, all to find not just the tools like what ETL tool are you going to use and how are you going to govern your data and what are you going to store it in and but also almost some more importantly was how are you going to enhance the data that you've already got? We knew from the very moment that we started that our data wasn't very good and that there was a lot of data we just didn't have. And so we knew we had to augment our data as much as we had to manage it, govern it, move it, and do all the other things. So we launched a whole bunch of RFPs. We began the hiring process. And by the end of the year, we had selected the vendors that we thought we really wanted. And we had also begun our initial hiring. We did not finish the hiring, though, up until about the last few weeks.
So on the vendor side, what kinds of things did you decide to outsource? So what are the broad categories? Cloud.
So I always say that I like to explain things to our senior executives using cartoons. Our IT infrastructure and our human capital didn't spring from the womb and work for something 30 years in our industry, knowing the ins and outs about analytics. And so for ours, we really lumped everything into 4 different categories of things using a car analogy. And cars are really simple, easy to understand. We said really there are 4 parts to our analytics implementation. The first is the driver, the human capital, right? The driver and the passengers are really important. They're going to tell you where you're going, and they're going to steer the car, and they're also going to do all the work in there too, right? The second part of it is the fuel for the car, which is your data, right? How do you move your data? How do you manage your data? How do you augment your data? How do you govern it? That's the second major category or major component that we had. The third was the engine, which consumes the fuel to create the mechanical energy to move you down the road. But in our instance with analytics, it is the insight itself, right? But I don't know if you've ever had a meeting with executives and said, I'd like to talk to you about a generalized autoregressive conditional heteroscedasticity. It's the fastest way to end a meeting, right? They just don't want to talk about that stuff. But if you say, I'd like to talk about an insight, a really cool insight that we did for your area, that resonates far more. So you've got to find a way to take the math that you built in the engine and visualize it and create it and put it in a way that really helps the executives understand just what the heck you did. And that's, in my car analogy, that's the exhaust, right? It helps you see what the engine produced, but it also helps you monitor what's happening and what's going on, right? It's the output of the engine's work. And so for us, we said, look, these are the 4 key components of what we're doing. And we're going to try and RFP and find partners to help in each of these areas. Obviously, human capital we're going to hire, but that's how we did it. That's how we went about structuring it. In each of those areas, though, we also had to be mindful because the company isn't just trying to transform using analytics. It's trying to transform everything all at once. We are doing our smart meter deployment, our AMI deployment going on right now. We are at the same time changing out roughly 70% of our IT infrastructure. So outage management systems, you name it, it's all in there in the change out. At the same time, we are attempting to rebuild our infrastructure for analytics. We're attempting to launch products and services with our customers, remake and rebuild our grid to be more resilient and whatnot. All this change going on simultaneously. So we had to, in that context, we had to also coordinate with all those other teams and go like, look, we're going to RFP for this, but we need you all to be part of that RFP process because while you're putting in your things, we have to put in ours, and we all got to sing Kumbaya and have one big group hug at the end of this to make sure that we're going in the same direction.
So these all were created and sent out by the 1-year mark?
Yes, absolutely. Wow, okay. Yeah.
So now you've got the RFPs out. We're now starting on year 2. Where are you and what are your next steps?
Sure. So you really get a diversity of responses in. And in our instance, we got a whole bunch of results. People that politely said to us, we've never really seen anyone try to do what you were doing. And our executives became a little worried. They were like, we really like what you're doing, but we're also nervous about it. We had to talk to them through about how we de-risked our implementation and how we were de-risking the process to select even vendors and partners. Which is to say that, our strategy was really built around flexibility, around standards, around broad industry acceptance, not just our own industry, but all industries. We found that, take, for example, open source. Open source is great. But at the same time, I have a CFO, I have a general counsel, I have a CEO, and they worry incessantly over the operations of our business. Our compromise in wanting to get the flexibility and the growth and the capability that open source offers was to buy a licensed version of those things. After all, Hadoop is in itself an open source capability, but you can buy licensed versions of it. Similarly, we went with a platform like SaaS because it really was broadly used well beyond and never really intended just for our industry. We knew we could flex really quickly on any number of problems that our executives might come up with, whether it was a safety issue, a customer issue, audit, supply chain, nuclear, anything they could come up with, if we picked those tools and conformed to those principles on it.
And did you also, as you were evaluating them, test how well these things could work together and these players had worked together historically? Because these things have to work together as a system, and that can be a big pain point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It can be a huge pain point. And for us, that was really important. It's why we, in the RFPs, as well as in our roadmap development, we spent a lot of time talking about architecture and about how those different pieces would integrate well with each other. We really wanted to make sure that to the extent you're going to pick one solution, that it worked well in an ecosystem and had a proven track record of working well in an ecosystem.
All right. So now we've de-risked it. We're going to move fast through your next year and a half, maybe.
Sure.
So what came after that, and where are we in the timeline?
Yeah, so we continued to hire. We started out with hiring 5 data scientists, 3 data engineers, 1 director for the organization, as well as a data governance manager and an agile project manager. All, I would say, very necessary early components. We had an infamous meeting with our CFO and general counsel saying, look, we've got lots of different ways to prioritize use cases here. What do you want to start with? And there are at least 8 different ways we came up to prioritize use cases. And in the end, which means if you have 8 ways to prioritize, you have no way to prioritize. In the end, he said, look, customer is our number 1 issue right now. We really need to work on customer issues. Go find some easy wins over in the customer organization. So that's where we started. While we were doing all the hiring and everything else, we also started to try some of those first use cases. In that time, we've prosecuted 19 of our initial 142 use cases that we identified.
Whoa, 142 use cases.
142.
19 in. All right, how are those going?
Yeah, so really well. And what's so funny is we did, after we started working on the 19, I said, it's really important that we get back out and tell all the executives what we've been up to, because we kind of went quiet there as we were going through the RFP process, as we were picking solutions, contracting. We want to go out and tell everybody what we were doing. So we created what I call the parade deck. And the parade deck was really meant to go around and talk to all the executives and say, here's what you saw, here's what we've done, here are the results we've gotten to date.
And so far on those 19, that's your 12x returns.
That's our 12x returns. The good part about the parade deck was, to a person, every executive and every leadership team that we talked to throughout the organization was blown away with the results that we've gotten so far. Those were primarily all in the customer area, everything from load forecasting to segmentation and propensity models, things we could use again and again and again, but that were providing instant benefits to the company. There were also some that we could use in our future deployments for technology. AMI, advanced metering infrastructure, takes years to deploy. We are ready now with some of those capabilities because we built the early stuff prior to actually launching all of that. But when we went around and did the parade deck, the unintended or somewhat intended consequence was that now all those executives were so excited by what we had done already, they wanted us to work on theirs too.
Right. They're feeling like have-nots.
Right. Exactly. And so that's triggered the next round of why we need to start hiring is we need to go ahead and staff up those capabilities. But if your resources come on in chunks, you really need to flex with capabilities that you bring in from the outside. And so what we've been doing in that process is we have consulting agreements, as long as they conform with the architecture and the standards of what we've done, to use third parties to come in and help us manage our workload between our initial hiring to our next level of hiring. And that helps us smooth out the demand capabilities for all these different organizations saying, me too, I want some of this stuff also.
Okay. And so these are things that can be easily codified and documented. So not random strangers, but people outside the organization can come in and try to follow it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, our whole use case development process from initial idea all the way to handover to the customer, because we do not own any of the models at the end of the day. That's really important from a change management perspective, because if I own the model, then I own the result. But if the business owns the model, then they own the result, and therefore they have to change, which is one of our key drivers. But for us, when we think about this whole journey and kind of getting to where the organization has this innate capability, our use case process has a really rigorous documentation process wrapped around it. We also invite in a lot of different players. We invite in finance because we want them to document the benefits that are coming. We think that keeps us honest and also keeps us out of the Grim Reaper business of trying to cut other people's budgets. We bring in IT because they're critically important to getting the data, getting access, making sure the infrastructure is up and running the way it ought to. And we do that. And of course, the business units, the customer themselves, they're the domain experts. And we bring data science, data engineering, and data governance. We use that process also to dictate our order in which we govern data, upgrade infrastructure, et cetera. We let the use cases determine the order.
Exciting is probably not the right word, but that was really educational. That was a very good deep dive into something that so many organizations are trying to do. So thank you, Ray, for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at staceyoниot.com. We'll see you next week.